Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is 12 o'clock, and we want to be respectful of people's time. Some of you are on a lunch break right now, and so I want to welcome you all to the first of a five-part series on Torat Eretz Yisrael, Tanakh teachers, the leading Tanakh teachers from Eretz Yisrael. And this is really a great point of pride for our community. One of the benefits of being on Zoom is that we're able to afford ourselves the opportunity to do these types of things. If you're in person, it's hard. You have scheduling issues, cost coming from Israel. But Baruch Hashem, now that everyone's on Zoom, we have the ability during lunchtime, while it's still a regular time in Israel, to be able to host such prominent figures like Rabbi Leibtag, and for the next number of weeks, really leading Tanakh scholars coming from the land of Israel. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and I want to thank our sponsor for the class today, Dr. Harold and Laurie Landa and family, for sponsoring this class and for being so generous in always sponsoring so many of Rabbi Leibtag's classes, as he's visited BRS many times. And it is a great honor and privilege to be able to welcome our featured speaker here today, Rabbi Menachem Leibtag.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. Just as a quick word of introduction and thanking, in general, whenever there's a crisis or something wrong, the Jewish way of doing things is turning the chala to a bracha. So, things are really difficult with not being able to travel and things like that. On the other hand, it's a great opportunity for learning, and I'd like to compare it to the Shemitah year, where every 7 years we take a break from our agricultural work, which was the main job of people back then, and we dedicate 1 year to learning, it's Torah study. So if unfortunately people are unable to go to work or unable to do their day-to-day routine, you can definitely learn during that time, and this whole pandemic gives us an opportunity to spend more time studying Torah. So hopefully we can sort of recharge and regroup and take a negative situation and find something positive in it. I want to begin with, I'll share my screen real fast and I'll explain the title. This week is Shabbat Hebron, Parshat Chayei Sarah, and the title I shared with the rabbi was The Biblical Importance of Hebron, from Geography to Theology to Democracy. Or the other title was Hebron or Jerusalem, What's the True City of King David? So I want to use the opportunity that we're on Zoom is to first study something about the geography of Israel, almost take you on a tiyul to appreciate what's so important about Hebron. We'll begin with pretty much a Tanakh tiyul. We'll talk with geography and then see how that geography explains a lot of details in Chumash, and then how it'll come to explain what's special not only about Hebron, but also about King David. As we give the share, feel free to ask questions. You can write something in the chat if something isn't clear. I'll stop for questions every 10, 15 minutes or so. The first thing I'm going to do is I want to share with you the famous cities of the Torah. What I want you to do in a minute, if you can, I'll try doing this with the chat. I want you to write from memory, what are the main cities of our forefathers? If someone asks you, what are the cities in Sefer Bereshit that our forefathers traveled to? Just name the cities that come up quite often in the stories of Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Just for the fun of it, just write them down. We'll see the chat. Okay. Beersheba's one. Any other ones?
One more. Shalem,
okay. Shalem is now. I'll talk about Shalem. We'll go over each one in a minute. Okay, let me open up the chat. Okay, we got most of them there, and just do a quick little. Okay, so I'm going to review the chat right now. That's good. So let's see. Beersheba, let me go one at a time. Beersheba, I totally agree with. A lot of stories happen in Beersheba. He built a Mizbech in Beersheba. They traveled there for sure. Shechem comes up a lot. Beit El comes up a lot. Shalem, I don't think that's a city that our forefathers visit quite often. It's not the same. Shalem is not the same as Beit El, Shechem, and Beersheba. So Malki Tzedek is the king of Shalem. But we don't find Avram traveling to Shalem or spending any time there or returning there. Depending where Shalem is. Hebron for sure. Sukkot is a one-time stopover for Yaakov. I wouldn't put it on the same thing. Everything will be on screen. It's always better to have a Tanakh. That's for sure. Kiryat Arba, which I think is the same as Hebron. And Ber Lachai Ro'i, okay, and Gerar. So listen, I want to go backwards. Gerar is mentioned once or twice, but not a common place they go to all the time. Same Ber Lachai Ro'i. But Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron, is mentioned a lot. Hebron for sure is mentioned a lot. Shechem and Beit El and Beersheba. Those are the main ones. I want to explain to you why specifically those cities are so central in the life of our forefathers. In fact, I was hoping to use this little map over here. I don't know if you guys have that ever at home. It's a topographical map. I'm probably not very clear. I'm going to share a better map online, but that's a little map of Israel that you can. This is like the mountain range in the middle of the country, the Mediterranean, the Dead Sea. We're going to talk about this in a 3D map here in a minute. Now, from what you remember, one last thing. When Avram makes Aliyah the first time, what's the first city he goes to? Anyone remember? Avram's first Aliyah, what city does he go to first? If you take a look in, I'll go back to my Chumash. There we go. I'm going to share my Chumash with you guys real fast. I'm sorry, wrong share. Let me stop that share. Anyone remember what city he goes to first? I mean, there's a better name for it. No, he doesn't go to I first. Here, we'll share our Chumash. Let's go to screen share and
Shechem.
Shechem. Very good. This first city is going to be Shechem. He's going to go first to Shechem, and then from Shechem he's going to go to Beit El. From Beit El he goes to Hebron. From Hebron to Beersheba. So let me get my picture on here. What happened to my picture? Here's Acrobat. There we go. Okay. Hope you guys can see this map. A little bit bigger. I don't know if you've ever seen this one before, but I'll use my little pointer. Where's my pointer? Here. On this map, what can you see? You can see, hope you see my little pointer going up and down. There's a mountain range, which is the heart of the country, which starts from Beersheba area, goes up through Drom Har Hebron, Top Hebron, Beit Lechem. See, that's going to be Beit El and Shechem. You see the cities? Shechem, Beit El. That's going to be Jerusalem, Beit Lechem area. Hebron and Beersheba. See that? That mountain range, those cities are on the top of the mountain range. Why is that mountain range so important? When Avram first comes from Mesopotamia, he's crossing the Golan Heights, probably coming down maybe through the Gilad. He goes down the Yabok River. It's where when Yaakov comes, he comes back the same way. He comes up what's called Nachal Tirzah and comes right to Shechem. But when our forefathers arrived from Mesopotamia to Israel, they always come to Shechem first, be it Yaakov or be it Avraham Avinu. From Shechem, they go to Beit El. Yaakov did that, as well as Avraham Avinu. From Beit El, they go to Hebron, and from Hebron, they go to Beersheba. But they're along a mountain range. I want to explain the reason for the mountain range. For that, we need this little map over here, which is very similar. Actually, let me go back to the Middle East map. Hope you can see this little map here. It's a satellite map of the Middle East. I'll show you something which hopefully you are aware of. If you look at this satellite map, this is the Mediterranean Sea, which I hope you notice here. Let me get a little pointer. This should be a pointer here. That's the highlight text. Okay, this area here, that's the Mediterranean Sea. I put a little color to it. Okay, this is the Nile River in Egypt. And on top of it is the Nile Delta going into the Mediterranean. Egypt was an ancient center of civilization because of the Nile River. Then there's Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent. This is the Persian Gulf. This is going to be the Nahar Prat. This will be the Euphrates River. This will be the Tigris River. Oh, not over there. That's the Tigris River. Between the rivers is Mesopotamia. If you remember from learning world history, probably back in 10th grade, these two centers of civilization, which are Egypt and Mesopotamia, are big centers because of the rivers. But because they were centers of civilization, people traveled between them. People traveled between Egypt and Mesopotamia. If you want to travel from Egypt to Mesopotamia, how do you get there? Well, you go along the Sinai Peninsula. See that? You go along the coast, you cut up through the Golan, and you go that way. Now that's the road. Let me make this a little bit bigger now. That road that connects Mesopotamia with Egypt goes through the land of Israel. Now, if I go back to my other map, this little smudge on the map here, that's pretty much the road. It's called the Way of the Sea, the Via Maris. Up Syria here, that's Mesopotamia. It goes through the Golan Heights, north of the Kinneret, past Megiddo, along the coast, the bit along the coastal plain, going down to Egypt. This highway along the coast, the Via Maris, was always controlled by a superpower, either Egypt or Mesopotamia. Whoever controlled it did well. The Jewish people are living on the mountain range parallel to that road. Superpowers don't need to be on the mountain range. They need to control this highway. But if you're living on this highway, if you're living on this mountain range, which is near the highway, people living on the mountain range, because they're in the mountains, they can grow fruit, they can grow herbs and spices and things like that. Especially they can have olives and dates and grapes and things like that. They can make wine, they can make oil, and they can sell that to the caravans going along the international highway. What are going to be the big cities on the mountain range? You want to live on the mountain range because the agriculture there is probably a little bit better, especially for the special fruits. And along the coastal plain, you have to deal with superpowers traveling all the time. You want to stay out of their way. But for trading, it's a good place to go to. So all the cities on the mountain range are all going to be along highways or valleys that connect to the coastal plain. So starting with Hebron. From Hebron, there's a valley called Nachal Beit Guvrin. There's a highway, if you've ever been to Hebron, when you can take a highway from Hebron and go, it takes you right to Ashdod and Ashkelon. It goes right past Beit Guvrin. What makes Hebron important is because of this crossroad that takes you to the coastal plain, to Ashdod and Ashkelon and that area there, area of Yavna. Okay. There's another valley called Emek Ayalon. If you've been to Israel recently, Highway 443, there's two roads from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. There's Highway 1, which is like a roller coaster going up and down. And then there's Highway 443, which first goes north towards Ramallah, Beitel, and then it goes through Emek Ayalon, past Modi'in, to the coastal plain. Emek Ayalon, and that's the natural highway. That's what makes Beitel a big city. Shechem, from Shechem over here, there's a valley that goes towards Hadera, which it's harder to see on this map. I'll show you in the other map. And there's another valley that goes beautifully to the Jordan River Valley, and on the way to up the Jordan, and another road that takes you right to the Emek Yisrael Valley. And now Beersheba, at the south of the mountain range, that's going to be for international travel. Sometimes people went this way. Sometimes people went this way more. There's an alternate route to go along what's called Derech HaMelech to go through Jordan. And if people went that way, then Beersheba would be the crossroads of people going from the Sinai, alternate route. Now, if I go back to the other map we had in the beginning. All these cities on the top of the ring, Shechem, Beit El, and Hebron, and Nadir Beersheba, they're all key for trading to the coastal road. So simply for a geographic reason, those cities have the biggest populations because I can make a living there. I have a business there, and they're all connected by a highway, which nowadays is Highway 60. Gush Etzion, which is over here, happens to be right between Hebron and Yerushalayim and Beit El. Yerushalayim itself is not a major city. Beit El is the big city. And then Shechem. That's the mountain range of the country. And the question is, which of these cities is going to be the capital of Israel? Now, Shechem is the center of Samaria. Hebron is the center of Judea. If you look at the 12 tribes and how they're divided up, you can see the areas very nicely. Reuven got his nachala on the other side of the Jordan early, and Shimon didn't really make it much. Levi didn't get a nachala; they were in education. Yehuda is the main tribe of Bnei Leah. So Yehuda's nachala is the whole Judean mountains to the south. Yisachar and Zvulun are in the Israel Valley, up here in the Jezreel Valley, up north. What's smack in the middle? Smack in the middle in Samaria are Yosef's children, Ephraim and Menachem. Ephraim begins with Beit El to Shechem, and from Shechem to Emek Yisrael is going to be Menachem. And then Gilad, the other half of Menachem will be over there. If you notice, Rachel's children are smack in the middle. Leah's children are the south and the north and surrounded. Now, if we're going to be a united country, what's the best place to build a capital? I could build a capital in Shechem, especially if that's where Yerovam starts his revolt. I could build a capital in Beit El, like Yerovam does later on. I could build a capital in Hebron, like David does in the beginning. And we'll see later on, Yerushalayim will be a bit of a compromise. Right? So that's the geography of Hebron. I want you to understand, because Hebron is the main city in Judea, in Yehuda, in the tribe of Yehuda. It has access both to the east-west highway going. Let me get this thing back. It has access both to the coastal plain going that way. It has access going south towards Hebron, going this way, that way. And then you meet Beersheba going for travel going that way. You also have access through Nachal Rugot down to the Dead Sea, if you want to go to Matzada and cross into Moab. So all those things make Hebron a big city. Plus you continue straight north, Derech Havot, and you get to Yerushalayim and work your way there. Hebron is a big city. And it's like, because of its location. So that's number one. So that was our first topic with Hebron. What I want to explain now, let me stop the share. Where does Hebron come up in Sefer Bereshit? So again, Avram first goes to Shechem and goes to Beit El, calls out in God's name. There's a very interesting story in chapter 13 in Sefer Bereshit. If I look at, where's my map? There we go. Wait, that's the wrong one. I need to get there we go. Let me share my screen real fast. Get my Tanakh open. If I look in chapter 13, Avram returns from Egypt. When he returns from Egypt, he goes back to Beit El, to the same place he built his Mizbeach in the beginning, and he calls out in God's name. That's the highlight of his career. In Beit El, which is smack in the middle, he makes a name for God. Then Lot, who was traveling with him, they come back with so much wealth, there's not enough room for both of them. Avram asks Lot, we don't want to fight too much. Avram makes an offer to Lot to go what's called north or south. The background here for a minute. Okay. Avram is going to make an offer to Lot. He says as follows: Halo kol haaretz lefanecha, the whole land is in front of you. Let's split. Im hasmol v'yamina, if you go to the north, small in a map is always north, and yamin is always south. If you want to go to the north, I'll go to the right, I'll go to the south. If you go to the south, I'll go to the north. Meaning, Avram is suggesting splitting between Judea and Samaria. Avram wasn't planning to go to stone or going to the east, but rather left and right in biblical maps are north and south. Like Teman, Yemen, is south. We read in the War of the Four Kings and Five Kings, small to Damascus, north of Damascus, small is north. All through Tanakh we have that. Lot doesn't pick north or south. He doesn't pick Judea and Samaria. What does he do? Lot lifts up his eyes and he sees the whole Jordan River Valley. Ki kulon mashkeh. It's all full of water. Before Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, just like Gan Eden, just like Egypt. And Lot picks the whole Jordan Valley. Lot leaves Bikerem, Chazal say he's living God, and they split. Here's the key point. Avram Yeshab Eretz Canaan. Avram stays on the mountain range in the land of Canaan. And Lot goes to the Jordan River Valley. Listen carefully. Vayehal at Stom. He pitches his tent till Stom. And the people in Stom were evil. After Lot leaves, God tells Avram Avinu, after Lot left him, Lift up your eyes from where you are in Beit El, in all four directions, north, south, east, and west. All this land I'm giving to you. Your children will be like the dust of the earth. Listen carefully now. Kumi talech ba'aretz. Don't stay in Beit El now. Spread out. Start traveling. You're on a pilot trip. See the land I'm promising you, because I'm giving it to you. Vayel Abraham, v'yavo vayeshe belonei mamrei asher bechevron. This is the first time I think we have Hebron now. Okay. Avram pitches his tent. He sits in Elonei Mamre, which is a suburb of Hebron, and there he builds a Mizbeach for God. He continues his mission of making a name for God, calling out in his name, and that's in Elonei Mamre. Look at the parallel. And this is, Chumash is setting up something which will follow all the way through all Nevi'im. Lot does what? Lot leads Avram, okay, and we're told Vayehau at Stone. He pitches his tent from Kikar Yarden, ends up in Stone before it was destroyed. Avram travels south, and where's he end up? In Elonei Mamre, which is Hebron. I'm going to show you this back on the map. If I go back to the map we had before, what do we see? Avram goes south and ends up in Hebron, in Elonei Mamre over here, in this area. Lot goes Kikar Yarden and ends up in the Dead Sea area where Stone, I guess, got destroyed somewhere over here somewhere. But both go south. Lot ends up in Kikar Yarden by Stone. Avram ends up in Elonei Mamre. Where does Elonei Mamre and Stone come up again? So if you follow Chumash, there's a beautiful line in the War of the Four Kings and Five Kings in the next chapter. In chapter 14, everyone knows about the big war between the kings of Mesopotamia and the kings of Canaan, mostly the area of where Lot is. So the king of Stone loses the battle. Okay. They take Lot and all his belongings. Lot is living in Stone. The refugee from the battle goes and tells Avram, see that? Lot yoshev b'stone, Lot sitting in Stone. Avram is shochein in Elonei Mamre. You remember the Midrash that the tent of Avram had the Shekhinah with it? Why? Both shochein and yoshev are both synonyms, but Lot is just sitting in Stone. Avram is shochein, he's dwelling in Elonei Mamre. But you see again the contrast between Stone and Hebron and Elonei Mamre. Where's the next time we find Elonei Mamre? So in chapter 15, we have the covenant of Brit Ben Abtarim. We have the Brit Milah in chapter 17, and the birth of and the tithing, and Brit Milah, and then Avram's going to have a child from Sarah. The next time we have Elonei Mamre is again will be in chapter 18. We read last week, Parsha Va'era, where Elonei Mamre is going to be in contrast to Stone. Why do I say that? If we go to chapter 18, which you all remember from last week, how does Parsha Va'era begin? God appears to Avram Avinu where? In Elonei Mamre. That's where he went. You know, after God told him in Beit El to go south, he ends up in Elonei Mamre, and Lot is living in Stone. God appears to Avram in Elonei Mamre. The three guests come, and when first they do all this Hachnasat Orchim, Avram entertains guests. They give him the birth of the news of the birth of Yitzchak. And when they leave, Vayekumu Misham Anashim, the three guests leave. Vayashkif al Pnei Stone, V'Avram Olech Imam L'Shacham. You see the contrast between Stone and Elonei Mamre. Again, Elonei Mamre is Hebron. It's a key suburb of Hebron. But you see here again, you see the contrast between Stone and Elonei Mamre. And from Hebron, if you know the view on the top of the mountain range, you can look down into the Jordan River Valley and see the area of Stone. In fact, Nachal al-Rugot, if you've ever been on Nachal al-Rugot, goes directly from Hebron to the Dead Sea area. What happens? We know the famous story of Stone. God's deliberating, should he or should he not destroy Stone? And there's something very important which will take us to King David. I want to go now from the story of Stone and Avram and Elonei Mamre, how this relates to King David himself. This will be the key thematic. We went from geography now to theology. Then we'll get to democracy or government. I want to explain why the city of Elonei Mamre in Hebron, even though it's not going to be David HaMelech's permanent capital, it's going to be his first capital. The first 7 years of his kingdom, he's in Hebron. There's a very deep connection between David and Hebron, which again is Elonei Mamre, much more than just a central geographic city, a business hub in the mountains of Judea. Because in this story, which contrasts Sdom with Elonei Mamre, Sdom thematically is a society that's the exact opposite of what Am Yisrael needs to be. In Sdom, no guests allowed. If someone invites a guest, there's a protest outside their house. They want to kick him out. Now, before the story of Sdom continues, God's going to tell Avram that he's deliberating. Remember, God tells Avram there's a cry of oppression coming from Sdom. God says, I'm going to go down and check it out. Should I or should I not? God is deliberating. Should he destroy Sdom or should he not destroy Sdom? It depends on how bad it is. It's bad, but is it beyond repair or not? God has to tell Avram Avinu, I'm going to check out the city to see if it's beyond repair, yes or no. And therefore, Avram is going to come and ask, what will happen, when you send your messengers there to check out the city, how many righteous people do you have to find to save the entire city? That explains Avram's bargaining. But before we get to this bargaining between God and Avram Avinu over how many righteous people need to be in Sdom to save the entire city, Chumash has to explain to the reader first, why is it necessary for this discussion to take place? I'll explain like this. God does not tell Avram Avinu, I'm going to destroy Sdom. God tells Avram Avinu, I'm deliberating, should I or should I not? In other words, God is not sharing with Avram Avinu his decision, he's sharing with Avram Avinu his deliberation. And now Chumash has to explain why God is doing that. So take a look. I have this highlighted in a different source sheet. Let me put it in the share. We'll go back to here. Okay. We had the map now. Now we'll go back to Shemot. There we go. What happened? Avram is on his way to Sdom. The guests are on the way to Sdom, and Avram is accompanying them out, and they're overlooking Sdom. God is going to continue. God later on is going to take Avram and tell him, God's going to tell Avram over here, in this section over here, let me erase all those. God's going to tell Avram Avinu about, there's a cry of Sdom, I'm going to check it out. But before God tells that to Avram Avinu, watch what happens here. God says as follows, Vashem Amar, Hamchasin Anim Avram Asher Yosef. Chumash tells the reader that God had said to himself, can I hide from Avram what I'm about to do? What's God about to do? God is about to make a decision, should he or should he not destroy Sdom? Why is God sharing his deliberation with Avram Avinu? Because there's something about the ways of God that Avram needs to know. Because Avram one day is going to become a great nation, and he'll bring blessing to all nations. And through Avram's nation that he'll begin, that'll bring blessing to other nations. In what way? Ki dativ. Because God came to know Avram Avinu, so that he would command his children, and they their children, and they their children, to follow the ways of God, doing justice and righteousness, doing tzedek u'mishpat, in order that God's vision for Avram will come true. Meaning, why is God sharing his deliberation? Avram needs to understand that God has high expectations from civilization. He has high expectations from human behavior, especially communal behavior or societies. And if a society is going corrupt and their behavior is bad, God might come and punish them. In fact, he should come and punish them. He has a reason to angry, but he doesn't punish right away. He's always waiting. Maybe the people will repent. Maybe someone will take leadership and fix things. Maybe there'll be, and that's the reason why if there's 50 righteous people, maybe tomorrow there'll be 60. Avram doesn't say save only the righteous. He says save the entire city, because if there's a small group of righteous people, maybe they'll have an effect on others, because behavior is contagious. God wants a nation that's going to be those 10 righteous people that will give God a reason not to bring destruction. If there's 10 people, or basically if there's a small group of people who care about evil, who care about injustice, that gives God a reason to hold out punishment on a wider community, on a wider society, because there's hope of recovery. If God sees nobody cares, He'll have to come and punish. He'd rather society fix itself. If they don't, God will have to bring a punishment. God's picking a nation to be a model nation for other nations to learn from. God wants everyone to do justice and righteousness. He's going to pick one nation that's their ethos. That's what they're all about. Now, the guidebook of how to do justice and righteousness is going to be the Torah. But here, Chumash in Sefer Bereshit is explaining through the story of Sodom, what is the underlying purpose? Why does God want a nation? And why is God picking Avram? What does Avram have to begin? That's why the beginning of chapter 18 began with the story of Achnasat Orchim, of Avram's hospitality, which is an example of justice and righteousness. That's why the birth of Yitzchak, the same angels talk about the birth of Yitzchak, because that's the son Avram has to teach this to. Now, what does this have to do with David HaMelech? This is a long-term goal. There's nothing Avram can do right now to save Sodom. Avram one day, hundreds of years later, is going to become a nation that will bring blessing. And here Chumash tells us why Avram was chosen. Now, Sodom, there's only one tzaddik in Sodom, Lot, and later God actually saves him. But the city is not saved. But Avram needs to know this because he has to pass this tradition to his children. Of all the kings and all the leaders of Israel, there's only one king who's associated with this theme. And that's in Shmuel Bet Perek Chet. Without going to the whole book of Shmuel, there's a section in Sefer Shmuel from Perek Hey to Chet, the good years of David, when he brings the ark to Jerusalem, when he wants to build a temple in Jerusalem, and he wins all these battles. The very concluding section of that unit, we're told that God saved David everywhere he went. Then we're told, Vayimloch David al kol Yisrael, David is king over Israel. Vahi David osem mishpat u'tzedakah l'chol amo. David does justice and righteousness for his whole people. Because the first Jewish leader who's known not only for his political leadership and military leadership and strength and greatness, he doesn't just take his power, okay, and become great. He uses his power to build a just society. And that's going to be the cutting edge of David over Shaul. Shaul was also a great man of war, conquered a lot, organized the nation. But he didn't take the vision and make it happen. If I want to understand why is it that David HaMelech is chosen, David is chosen because he does mishpat and tzedakah, he does justice and righteousness. And the theme of justice and righteousness began in the story of Sodom, which begins in Elonei Mamre, which is Hebron. You understand the connection now? David HaMelech is associated with Hebron, isn't he? Our forefathers, how come they're buried in Hebron? Of all the cities. Hebron, if I'm looking for a story in Chumash that explains the underlying purpose of why we're chosen, of what we're all about, it begins in the story, the answer in Chumash is what we just read. In the introduction to the story of Sodom. In Achnasat Orchim of Abraham, and the lack of Achnasat Orchim, and what's antithetical to Judaism, the city of Sodom. We're guests are not allowed. In Sodom, remember, in Perkei Avot, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. That's the way of Sodom. Avram is all about chesed, and kindness, and caring about others. And it's for that reason God picked a nation so that Avram would begin that tradition. God didn't say, I know it will be. I came to know him in order that it will be. That's our destiny. If it works, that's up to us. But in the story that defines the underlying purpose of why we're chosen and what our goal is as a nation and why God chose us and what he expects from us, that begins in Elonei Mamre, which is Hebron. That's the city of our forefathers. That's why Avram is going to be buried there. That's why Avram buys a burial plot there, because Avram wants all of his children who are going to come visit their graves to remember that theme of justice and righteousness. And it's not by chance that David begins his kingdom in Hebron, his political capital. When he first becomes king is in Hebron. Later he's going to move it to Yerushalayim, the other city of justice. Remember? Like it said, someone mentioned Shalem. Now, why going to move the capital to Yerushalayim? Because even though Elonei Mamre begins the topic, because David's king over all of Israel, I need to be a capital city that unites Leah's children and Rachel's children together. I need a city of unity. And therefore, there'll be elements of Hebron that move with David to Yerushalayim. David starts in Hebron, and basically moves Hebron to Yerushalayim. And that's going to be the city, remember, Yerushalayim, a city of Yirah and a city of Shalom. And remember, who's the king of Shalem, of Yerushalayim? Malki Tzedek, the whole theme of Tzedek. So I'm trying to explain, there's a very deep connection between David and this theme of Tzedek u'Mishpat in the very story in Sefer Bereshit. What's most interesting, at the end of the story in Stone, Lot is saved. Lot has a very sad story at the end. Everyone knows what happens with Lot and his daughters. Lot has a son or a grandson named Moab, who survives. Moab becomes a nation. From Moab, we have Ruth, the Moabite woman, who marries who? Boaz. And there's a whole Megillah about that. Remember, what's Megillah Ruth about? It's a book only about Chesed, Tzedek u'Mishpat. Ruth herself, Naomi, especially Boaz. They have a great-grandson, David. And in a very interesting way, through Lot's daughter and then his son, Moab, to Ruth, to David, we fix what went wrong in Stone. It's called a tikkun. The tikkun always comes through the female. It's the men of the we not allowed to marry. And remember Ammon and Moab, we can't intermingle with them. We're told in Sefer Dvarim because they did not greet us with food and water when we came out of Egypt. Remember in Sefer Dvarim, Asher lo kibbutz etchem b'lechem v'mayim. The men of Moab we don't accept, but the women of Moab we do accept, because the women of Moab is going to be the opposite. That'll be Ruth, and that'll be that theme of David. So that theme, by the way, in Yechezkel, we're told what was the sin of Stone? Stone was a city because it was in the Jordan Valley, full of water, full of gon sibat lachem, that tons of bread, tons of food, tons of prosperity, nice and quiet, but it was a gated community. It couldn't care less about the poor and the needy. And that's why God got so angry with them. That's what Yechezkel explains. What was the sin of Stone? David does the opposite. He does mishpat tzedakah l'chol amo. In Tilim, David is writing his hope for his son Shlomo. And what does he say? Shlomo, this is a psalm for Shlomo. God should give his judgment to you and his righteousness to the son of the king. What does Shlomo need to do? Judge your people with tzedek and your poor people with mishpat. Okay, let the hills praise you, and let the high hills, remember of Judea, the Judeans, let them be full of tzedakah. Judge the poor people, okay? And then you can become a king. I want you to set up a nation, and now we'll get to like more modern day times. I want you to be the head of a nation, not just a nation stam, but kings from faraway islands and lands, like the Queen of Sheba, should come and bring you presents. Kings from other countries should come and bow down to you. That's Yitzchak's blessing. Remember to Yaakov, thinking Yisrael, other nations should bow down to you, but why should they respect you? You'll be a kingdom who's known not only for the power, but what they do with that prosperity and that power, because they're saving the poor from trouble. They care about the less fortunate. Yechos al dal ve'avyon. They care for the poor and the downtrodden. And the destitute people, they'll come and help. So there's a goal of having prosperity. What do you do with your prosperity? Now, you can't be a model nation if you're a third-class country. The way you make an impact on other nations, you have to be a first-class country with a strong economy and a strong army and culture and wisdom and keeping the Torah, and act in a way that sanctifies God by being his model nation, by how you run your society. You run your society in an ideal way, people can learn from you. And that's what makes David not just king himself, but that's what makes his family the royal, that's what puts him in power. And that's why he's going to be the eternal kingdom. That's why the Machut goes to David. We talk about that in Shemon Esrei. Therefore, the Queen of Sheba, when she comes to visit, remember, she has all these questions for him, and she hears about Yerushalayim, but when she leaves, she's so impressed by her visit, she praises all the men of David that they're so lucky to hear his wisdom all the time, and she gives David a blessing that God should bless you for sitting on the throne of Israel. Bavat Hashem et Yisrael olam, God loving his people forever. Listen carefully. He made you king so that you can do justice and righteousness. That's what the Queen of Sheba sees when she comes on a royal visit. She doesn't just come to answer riddles. She's impressed by her visit, and she's going to bring that message home to her country. Again, but I'm trying to show you later in Tanakh that the story of Elonei Mamre and the story of stone, which is the backbone of later of the birth of King David, remember, through Lot and Moab, but also the seed of our forefathers, the Avot, Avram. For that reason, they're chosen. In Elonei Mamre, it all begins, and that's where the theme of why we're chosen all starts. Now, just a couple more real quick sources. And so we talked about the map. We talked about Lot and Stone and the contrast. The three angels, they come to visit Elonei Mamre. This is just the Hebrew side. We talked about Avram's intent. And I want to share with you, we did all these, but I did that with English and Hebrew, and we did Yechezkel. Now, what does Yeshayahu say? This I don't need to translate because you remember this from Shabbat Chazon. What did Yeshayahu say? He says, Yeshayahu is explaining why God's so angry with his people. He says, Kisdom ma'inu kamara deminu. We're acting like Sdom and Amorah. That's how bad we are. And he calls the people of Israel officers of stone. He says, he gives them rebuke. What's going on? He says, I don't want your sacrifices. I like to say, don't give me that bull. He says, I don't want your animals. I don't want you visiting me. You're trespassing. I don't like your sacrifices. He says, your holidays, your Rosh Chodesh parties and your Yom Tovim, I hate them. They're annoying to me. I can't take them. He says, and when you pray to me, when you lift up your hands in prayer, I'm going to hide my eyes from you. And when you pray a lot, I'm not listening. Why? Because your hands are full of iniquity. Clean up your act, okay? Limdu etev, learn good. Dirshu mishpat, do justice. Get rid of things that are unjust. Shiftu yatom, riva amanat, take care of the orphan and the widow. Okay, what happened to the city that was once full of mishpat and had tzedek? What happened to that city? Everything's now full of counterfeiting. Everyone's taking bribes, okay? And no one cares about those in need. And therefore, God's saying, I'm going to come and punish you. And now the bracha of Shmon Esrei, but how we end after of Hashiva Shaftach Rishon, God said, after I punish you, I'll bring back your judges like the good old days. That's our blessing in Shmon Esrei. Hashiva Shaftach Rishon, and it ends with Baruch Hashem Melech Tzedakah Mishpat. Why? Because what will bring redemption? Mishpat and Tzedakah. So the final redemption and Mashiach David is exactly that thing. Again, I could bring another 20,000 examples, but we had that from David HaMelech. And then finally, what could have saved Yerushalayim according to Yirmiyahu? Yirmiyahu tells the king, go to the king's house and tell him the following. So listen up what you're doing. Komar Hashem, asu mishpat u'tzedakah. Do justice and righteousness, and then you can save the city. And who's the king? He says, Shema dvar Hashem melech Yehuda, hayoshev al kisei David. You're sitting on the throne of King David, the thematic, not the physical chair, but the throne of King David, the concept of King David. Okay? If you want to stay on your throne, if you want the Davidic dynasty to remain, it has to be rooted in justice and righteousness. He says, if you do that, the temple can remain, the city can remain. If you don't do that, the temple will be destroyed. And then Yirmiyahu continues, what did Yoshiel do right? Your father, he said, he did justice and righteousness and took care of the poor and the needy. He says, that's what it means to know God. Halo yadato, Yirmiyahu says. And that's why Shiloh was destroyed, because Bnei Eli don't know God. That's the whole idea of knowing God. So in a nutshell, Yirmiyahu also complained, those teaching Torah don't know God. Doesn't mean they know God philosophically. They don't know God. They don't follow his laws. They don't take this concept of justice and righteousness and apply it in their day-to-day life. And then finally, Yirmiyahu says, what will bring, this is the other bracha in Shmon Esrei at Tzemach David. God says a time will come, as we're hoping for, but Kimoti the David Tzemach Tzadik, Malach Melech V'Iskil, V'Sam Mishpat U'Tzedakah Ba'aretz, V'Yamav Tivasha Yehuda. I hope my point is clear, that what I'm trying to show you is that the theme of David HaMelech, The reason why Hebron becomes a city of our forefathers, I think the reason why Avram wants the burial site in Hebron, it all begins with the story of Elonei Mamre. And the contrast between Elonei Mamre in stone and God's vision to Avram Avinu. I'll end with one last point. Let me just check the chat. Why did Avram go to Avram? We'll talk about Lot and Avram at the end in a minute. What I want to explain to you is that this conversation in chapter 18 between God and Avram Avinu, which is Elonei Mamre in contrast to stone, and Elonei Mamre again is Hebron. We explain how it leads to King David, and the theme of what makes King David the Mashiach and leading our country forever. One of the most important things is it's the last time in Sefer Bereshit that God speaks to himself before making a major decision. When God creates man, remember? God says he talks to God talks to himself over and over again in Sefer Bereshit, doesn't he? When every day of creation, he talks to himself. When he makes man, he talks to himself, and even joins in his I call them his board members up above, the Beit Din Shamala, the kingdom above. Before the flood, he talks to himself about bringing a flood. After the flood, he talks to himself, promising not to do that again. The Tower of Babel, again, he talks to himself to bring punishment, and then he also consults with his Beit Din Shamala, with his board members above. The last time God talks to himself in Sefer Bereshit, and the last time there's a conversation between God and Avram Avinu, what's it about? It's this topic of why you're chosen. In Perek Yud Chet, in the story of Sodom, when God says, Hamachasani Avram, when God says to himself, can I have from what I'm about to do? It's the last time we find God talking to himself, because from now on, he has who to talk to. He talks to Avram Avinu before making a decision. And I want to claim that's the essence of prayer. In what way? God has the right to bring punishment. We see throughout Chumash, God has expectations. God can punish society. He can punish civilization. He has the right to do that. And he'll do that when he's unhappy with their behavior. But before he does that, he's always going to give society a chance to fix itself. He'll send a wake-up call and see if they get it. Then he'll send another wake-up call. Just read all the Tochachot. His hope is that someone in that society will take leadership and lead people in the right direction. It's for that underlying reason he's picking Jewish people. But when we pray to God and ask him to help us in war or in trouble or in famine, or again, whatever the trouble might be, if God sent that trouble as a wake-up call, if you want to give God a reason to take away that trouble, you have to show God that you care about the injustice, that you want to do something better, you want to fix your ways. We don't pray, God, take away war, take away famine, take away plagues and things like that. Rather, we pray to God that we've learned our lesson, that we've tried our best to understand what we can do better. We care about injustice, and we try our best to build a better society. That sincerity, which is motivated by prayer, that can lead God. God can have mercy. He can have deen. He can have rachamim. He can be merciful. He doesn't have to be merciful. He can be harsh. But if God sees that we care about this thing, and he sees people care about injustice, that gives God a reason to hold back punishment or even take away punishment. And that's the thing we learn from the story that begins here in the city of Hebron. So what I'm trying to share with you is this idea that we know the geography of Hebron, its physical location, which is important. But the key story, which is the last conversation between God and Avram Avinu in his lifetime with our forefathers. And it's the last time he talks to himself, because now he can consult with man before making his decisions, seeing if they care, and that will give God a reason to put up punishment. That all began in Hebron and Elonei Mamre. It's going to be the reason for our political leadership of Malchut David, and David becomes the model of what political leadership needs to be. And let's say we don't have a Davidic dynasty, but let's say we have a government and we have a community, we have leadership. The leadership model of David, taking his prosperity and using it for justice, that is to be the model of leadership that we have to try to emulate and follow. We don't have to look someone specifically a descendant of the house of David. We need the characteristics of Malchut David to be worthy of redemption. I want to close with just an idea from in memory of Rabbi Sachs, they have all these little tapes of little snips he said. One of the most beautiful things he said about the difference in Judaism and regular religion, with the idea of democracy or government. He says, most governments, most countries, it's the idea of power. You have power, you have military strength, you have control. And most international politics is who has the most power, who has the biggest army, who has the biggest economy, who has the power to make decisions. So he says, he calls that the idea of power. He says, Judaism is the power of an idea. And our country is not about the idea of having power. It's the power of an idea. You have an idea, you have an ethos, you have a goal. And you can use political power, political strength in order to promote that ideal. That's the power of an idea, that sometimes you might need a government to promote it, but the goal is not the power. The goal is having the power to promote the idea of using power for the greater good. And that's what that balance between particularism and universalism, where what do we focus on as the Jewish people? Are we caring about ourselves? Or are we caring about all of mankind? If we didn't care about ourselves, we wouldn't be around for thousands of years. If we didn't have all the laws of the Torah and all of our holidays and our uniqueness, we wouldn't be around as a people. But our goal is not just to be our own people. Our goal is to be a people that has an impact on the wider society and community. We do that as a model nation. We don't tell people how to act. We have to be an example of good behavior. And hopefully, in situations like we have, we can, with proper education and guidance and following these things of David, we have to build communities that model other nations. People, here's how society should act. Here's how they care. Here's how they not just keep laws, but they do their best to make things better and caring about the needs of others. So hopefully we can take that message with us for Shabbat Chayei Sarah. And when we talk about Hebron and the city of our forefathers, the theme of Hebron, I think, all begins with this theme of Elonei Mamre. So I'll stop now and take questions, if there are any. Let me see, but after Soon is destroyed, why doesn't God